one of the things I had to figure out um, pretty early on was how to practice improvising. And this happened because I studied jazz, among other things, in school, and I was not particularly good at it. Um, but I had this fantastic teacher, this guy named Bill Barron, this tenor saxophone player, who taught these improvisation classes where I went to school. And he didn't teach us a lot about transcribing or like the difference between swing and bebop or any of these stylistic things, but he taught us how to practice. He taught us how to like have like a really methodical way to get around on your instrument. And and so a few years later, when I got interested in playing bluegrass dobro, which is about as far from the bebop saxophone as you can get, I think, uh, I basically suddenly had something that I really wanted to do that I could apply all of his ideas to. And so the biggest challenge was, bluegrass is fast a lot of the time. And so there's not a lot of time to really be sitting around and thinking, and I had to really have good reflexes. And so, the idea of practicing improvising, it seems totally contradictory or like an oxymoron, right? Because how do you practice doing this thing that you do on the fly? But but I worked out a few things that really helped, and so I'm going to explain these 5 steps for practicing improvising. And so here they are. The first one is to think backwards, or basically reverse engineer the situation, and that means picture yourself in the situation that you're going to be in, whether it's like a jam session or playing with your friends or being on stage with your band or sitting in somewhere, whatever it is that you want to be able to do. And what's involved? What kind of songs are you playing on? What keys are they in? What are the tempos like? Just get as clear as you can about what the end game is. Like, what are you going to be doing? Because you don't want to figure out what you need to know when that's actually happening. You don't want to be up there going, oh, right, they always play at this tempo, or they always play in this key, or we always do this song, and every time I get to this chord, I crash and burn, right? So you want to anticipate, just kind of walk yourself through, like, well, what's going to happen? Like, what do I need to know how to do? And that's what you focus in on. So you think backwards is the first thing, just to kind of figure out what it is you need to know how to do. Step 2 is to think about phrasing. A lot of the time, improvising is taught in terms of like, these are the chords, these are the scales, put them together, poof, you're playing music. But really, from just trying to do that it just ends up sounding like you're playing scales over a chord progression, right? It doesn't sound like music. And on the flip side, if you're self-taught and you learned from other players or you learn from records, you tend to think in terms of licks. But once you've played the licks, then what? So these two things are kind of at opposite ends, right? Knowing scales, knowing licks. If you can come to the middle and think about phrasing, think about the kinds of songs you're going to be playing on, the kinds of grooves, the kinds of soloing you want to be doing, and then think about how that kind of soloing is phrased. If you think about blues, very often there's, everybody, it's a cliche, but it's true. There's a kind of call and response phrasing. You hear a short phrase and then a longer phrase. And sometimes the phrases have this very vocal quality. So if you listen to how people sing and then you listen to how they play the guitar, a lot of times the phrases kind of lead into the downbeat. They kind of have this anticipatory feeling. Bluegrass, I remember Fats Kaplan, who I learned how to play dobro from, and steel guitar, used to explain, like, you think about bluegrass fiddle or bluegrass mandolin playing, it's like there are these short phrases, and then there are these longer phrases, which is actually similar to blues, and that's no surprise. But his point was there are these shorter phrases, and then there are these longer, busier phrases, especially with fiddle playing. That's kind of just a characteristic of how fiddle playing developed and how it sounds. So what's the phrasing of the music you want to play? Where do the shorter, more song-like, more vocal-like phrases happen? And where do the busier, faster phrases happen? And chances are, it's not the short phrases and the more vocal-like or song-like phrases that are tricky. It's those busier moments when you want to be able to play something that has more energy and takes up more space, but you're running out of road, you don't know what to do with your fingers. So that's something to think about, is like, where does the busy playing happen? And that may be the thing that you want to really zero in on. So step 3, let's say it is the busier stuff that's challenging. Whether it's like fast sort of hammer-on pull-off stuff in the open position, or it's faster bending blues licks, or it's more like chicken picking country stuff. Whatever it is, if it's busier and it's faster, then we sort of isolated that there are those phrases that you need to be able to execute. And so what are they made up of? What's like the DNA? And a lot of times you can break down busier licks, like a 1 or 2 measure lick, into little 3 and 4 note units. You can kind of go, oh yeah, it's like these 4 notes, these 4 notes, these 4 notes. And you can kind of get to where it's like, oh, if I could execute a few of these, and then the licks that you want to learn, or the kind of phrasing you want to be able to execute, are made up of these smaller units, right? These 4 note things that get built into 4 notes and 4 notes makes a measure, 8 notes and 8 notes make a 2 measure phrase. And so if you can, one thing that you can do is, instead of trying to keep this all in your head, is you can just, either from learning it off of a record or just thinking about what you already know, take a lick that you know and jot it down just in tablature, or however you can get it onto paper, and then see if you can break it up into these 4 note pieces. And then once you've got 3 or 4 different 4 note fragments, see if you can move them around and start, like, say, just call the first one A, and then B, and then C, and then D, and see if you can just do the math of going, okay, I can play A and then B, I can play A and then C, I can play A and then D. Well, that's 3 different measures, 3 different ways to do it. Then you can start with B. I can play B into A, I can play B into C, I can play B into D, and so on. So you just make all the possible combinations. And you can do this with 1 2 measure lick. You can divide it up into its pieces, and then you can mathematically expand it into all these ideas. But the practice thing is to do this, learn each 4 note idea, and then see if you can do these combinations on the fly. So turn on a metronome or put on a groove, and just playing 1 and 2 and da 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 da. And just see if you can start getting the fluency of combining and recombining those ideas, so that you can start to, build up a vocabulary of these combinations, right? So that's really steps 3 and 4 together, because like breaking it down into the units, that's a thing of its own, like sort of looking at what you're trying to do and looking at how it's done by other people. And then this practice of combining and recombining things is another step beyond that. So you can break those into 2 things. And then once you've done that and you've built up this vocabulary, the last step is to kind of take the whole thing back up the chain in reverse and go, okay, well, I want to play on this kind of tune. It's phrased this way. So you practice playing, say it's a call and response thing where it's a short phrase and a long phrase. You take 1 short phrase as your kickoff phrase, and then you try to answer it as many different ways as you can. And so now you're actually practicing in the context of what you really need to be able to do, as long as you're doing the kinds of licks you need to do in the kinds of tunes, the kinds of context, the kind of chord progression, the kind of tempos that you need to be able to do. So those are 5 steps for practicing improvising. You want to work backwards from what you need to know how to do. You want to look at the phrasing of the kinds of songs you want to play on. You want to break it down into its little units. You want to practice making combinations of those units as many ways as you can in time with a metronome if possible. And then you want to take that whole process and apply it in reverse to the situation that you're in. So 5 steps for practicing improvising. I hope that sounds like something that might work for you. If you got a question about it or a comment, I'd love to hear from you. Scroll down, leave me a message down below. I'll try to get back to you. I'd love to know what you're working on, and I'll see you next time.